In my last video, I talked about how The Parish was my favorite campaign in Left 4 Dead from a narrative perspective. However, The Parish is not the only campaign in Left 4 Dead that has a very strong story, which brings us to the topic of today's video. The Sacrifice is another one of Left 4 Dead's best campaigns. It's only 3 chapters long, but I still think it's better than a lot of the other campaigns. And just like with The Parish, my favorite part about this campaign is the story behind it. However, unlike The Parish, which heavily relied on walls of text to tell its story, The Sacrifice is a lot more direct with its storytelling. Most people know about the ending and Bill's heroic sacrifice, but I'm willing to bet that most people don't know about the story that led up to it. The Sacrifice also has a comic book, which adds a whole new layer to this campaign and its narrative. In today's video, I'm going to be doing a story analysis of the Sacrifice campaign and its comic book. I will be doing my best to cover both, but keep in mind that the comic is where we get most of the details, so I'll mainly be covering that. But with that said, there is a lot of ground to cover, so let's not waste any more time. The comic starts off with the gang fighting off the infected hordes in the farmhouse at the end of Blood Harvest. After making light work of a tank, the military arrives and the survivors make a safe escape. After taking a second to breathe, Lewis starts talking cheerfully about how they're finally safe and get to kick back and relax in a safe zone. This is when Francis intrudes, and in typical Left 4 Dead fashion, Francis and Lewis start arguing. What the hell kind of attitude is that, man? Francis, we're in an armored personnel carrier, driven by the military, being taken to a safe zone. Can I finally get you to admit everything is gonna be just fine? Lewis, I hate to be the one to break this to you, but we've been heading to the safe zone 4 times now. Helicopter crashed. Plane crashed. Boat kicked us out and left us to die. Trust me, something will go wrong and we'll all be dead. Lewis tries to ask the driver of the vehicle where they're being taken to, and he's promptly ignored. Now, before we move forward, I should make something clear. The Sacrifice goes into the backstories of each of the 4 survivors, but I'm going to be glossing over these for the sake of time. Besides, I might be saving these for a future video, but we'll see. Now, with that out of the way, let's continue. The survivors arrive at the safe zone, and the military orders them to drop their weapons and leave the vehicle. Francis starts running his mouth, which leads to one of the military officers smacking him with his rifle, knocking him out cold. The military officer then says, "Bring your smart-ass friend. Anybody makes a break for it, that body gets shot. Welcome to Millhaven." Later on, Francis wakes up in a cell with Lewis, who informs him that Bill and Zoe have been taken in for testing. Francis comes up with the genius plan of talking shit to the guards outside their door. Spoiler alert, this does not work. Later on, we see 2 commanding officers, Lieutenant Mora and Major Everly, having an argument about the security of Fort Millhaven. Lieutenant Mora argues that due to the mutation of the zombies, Fort Millhaven is no longer secure. Major Everly, however, scoffs at the idea of mutating zombies, writing it off as nothing but rumors. After the meeting, Lieutenant Mora voices his frustration to one of his soldiers. "Chain of command? We haven't heard from command in 9 days. This is a sick joke. We're on our own out here. Retreating from this base is not a defeat. Losing the men defending it is. What should we do, sir?" "Round up Penna, Brooks, and Davis. My quarters, 1400. I have one duty. To the men who put their lives in my care. I am not going to sacrifice my platoon. Not for Everly. Not for carriers." Meanwhile, Bill and Zoe are with the doctor mentioned earlier. The doctor requests to see an injury on Zoe's arm, but she refuses. One of the soldiers gets aggressive with Zoe, and Zoe responds by smacking him and taking his rifle. Another guard enters the room and diffuses the situation. After both soldiers leave, the doctor then explains that he too is a carrier, and he tells Zoe and Bill that the only reason he's alive is because the military thinks he can develop a cure. However, the doctor informs Bill and Zoe that a cure is impossible, and once the military finds that out, they're gonna kill all the carriers. Their conversation is interrupted by the alarm sounding. Bill and Zoe then lose their shit, informing the doctor that the infected are attracted to noise. Meanwhile, on the other side of Fort Millhaven, Lieutenant Mora puts a bullet in Major Everly, officially relieving him of his command. If you're curious about what carriers are, as well as more details on the military's treatment of the carriers, be sure to check out my previous video. But anyway, we then go back to Lewis and Francis in their cell. After a brief conversation, they hear the alarm sound. Lewis and Francis are quick to point out that the infected are attracted to noise, and they both request to be let out of their cell. A few seconds later, though, a witch is seen walking up the hallway. Lewis tells the guards to drop their weapons and get flat up against the wall. At first, the guards are hesitant, but they comply. The witch then walks right past the cell and the guards without any issues. After the witch is gone, the guard then unlocks the cell. "Alright, zombie experts, there's an armory down the hall. Let's get you guys some guns." At this point, Fort Millhaven is being completely overrun. Zoe and Bill are fighting the infected trying to get to the armory, where they find Lewis and Francis already waiting for them. The crew stocks up on ammo and resources and decide that a nearby train depot is their best bet at escaping. One of the guards, whose name is revealed to be Jeff, voices his concerns about the plan. A quarter mile of solid infected, and whatever these new things are, it'd be suicide. Jeff, was it? "Jeff, the 4 of us walked here from Philadelphia. I think we can make it across a courtyard." We then cut to Lieutenant Mora and his crew fighting the infected outside of Fort Millhaven. A zombie attacks Lieutenant Mora, scratching his face and knocking off his mask. Mora commands to be pulled up, but his command is denied. The soldier brings up that Lieutenant Mora is now infected, but despite his fate being sealed, Mora keeps demanding to be lifted up. Eventually, he is abandoned by his squad and left to fight the infected by himself. We then cut to Bill giving his typical leader speech as the gang steps out of Fort Millhaven. Alright, new meat, listen up. It's a quarter mile to the train yard. When we get there, we're getting on the first train pointing south. If you want to join us, that's your business. As for getting there, I don't care how much training you think you got. You stay close, you keep up, and you don't do shit until you see the four of us do it first. You fall behind, we leave you behind. As the crew is walking, Zoe and Bill have a conversation. By the way, I call bullshit. No way you're leaving the new meat if they fall behind. Watch me. Zoe is visibly angry with this answer. How about us? You leaving us behind too? Never. We come back for our own. The crew is interrupted by Lieutenant Mora, who's half dead and pointing a gun at Lewis. Bill responds by laying Lieutenant Mora flat on his ass with one punch. As the crew is running off, Mora attempts to shoot Lewis, but is killed by a tank before he could pull the trigger. The survivors are almost at the train, but this is when Annie and Jeff, the two guards who were with Lewis and Francis, decide to part ways with the survivors. Annie and Jeff then split off from the group. The survivors then make it to the train, and without wasting another second, Bill is able to get the train moving. As the train is leaving Fort Millhaven, however, multiple survivors, including the doctor, attempt to make it onto the train. Zoe screams at Bill to slow down, but her requests are ignored. All the survivors from Fort Millhaven, including the doctor, were slaughtered by the infected. After the train stops, Zoe and Bill have an argument, and this is easily one of my favorite moments from the Sacrifice comic. Bill, we know there's more carriers out there. People like us. We could find them. We could fight back. Zoe, we've been fighting back since we started out from Philly. We shot our way through hell to get to that safe zone. Almost died 10 times over. We got lucky. And they locked us up and tried to kill us. We tried it your way. The Keys? Well, it's close enough to get to from here. It's miles off the mainland, full of inhabitable islands, good weather all year round, no more army, no more jail, no more zombies. I know it hurts, kid, but we can't save everybody. We gotta look out for our own or we will die. That is as simple as I can make it. Zoe then replies with, I'm not sad because we couldn't save everybody, Bill. I'm angry because I want my world back. I mean, half the time I think you're enjoying this. I hate this. I'm willing to die if it means we fight back. If it means we find more people like us, and we wipe these fucking things off the face of the earth, and you want to run off to an island and leave everybody. Who else have you left behind, Bill? Who else are you going to leave behind? This is a critical moment in Zoe and Bill's relationship. Bill's happy ending of going to a deserted island is almost the polar opposite of what Zoe wants, but they make their respective viewpoints crystal clear. It's one of those scenarios where you completely understand why both sides feel the way they do. Now, this is the moment where the Sacrifice comic merges into the campaign. Before we talk about the ending, I want to go over some of the dialogue in the Sacrifice, as well as some of the connections between the campaign and the comic. After starting Chapter 1, sometimes you'll get this dialogue between Zoe and Bill.
Good thing we left all those people behind so we could escape.
Pull yourself together. If not for me, then for them.
Whatever, I don't care.
A good chunk of the dialogue in the Sacrifice is Bill and Zoe arguing with each other, and while Zoe disagrees with the plan, she's ultimately outvoted and is forced to go along with it. Now here's an interesting point that I completely missed in all my years of playing this game. In the Sacrifice comic, the crew finds a working sailboat. Inside, they find a dead guy and a massive amount of supplies. Now they have everything they need. Food, water, a boat. One problem though, the nearby bridge is lowered and blocking the way to the ocean. Bill is quick to point out that whoever owned this boat left to raise the bridge and did not come back. Well, in Chapter 2 of the Sacrifice, you find this written on the wall. Allison, Mark has a sailboat ready at the bridge. Meet us there. And in Chapter 3, you find this. Allison, bridge is down. We are screwed. I can't say this with 100% certainty, but I'm almost positive that this guy is Mark, and odds are Mark and his crew of survivors died trying to raise the bridge. Also, if you play the finale of the Sacrifice, you can find this exact boat if you look through the fence. Now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the finale. After turning on all the generators, the crew presses the button and the bridge begins to raise. However, that's when one of the generators turns off. The bridge is now stuck and the survivors are low on ammo with a massive wave of infected coming their way. Lewis starts giving his, I guess it's over speech, but it's interrupted by Bill leaping off the bridge, demanding the survivors to cover him. You'll never stop coming, do you? Every time I think we're done, every time I think she's finally safe, I can finally rest, there you are again, like a bad nightmare, and I have had enough. Almost there. Do it, you old useless bastard. Get to work. Get them out of here. Get them safe. Don't let her down. Bill makes it to the generator and successfully turns it on. The bridge is successfully raised and out of the reach of the infected. After taking a second to breathe, Bill looks back at the bridge. Somebody must have moved that bridge since I looked last, because it looks about 1,000,000 miles away. No, don't think like that. You can still make it back. You can still... Suddenly, Bill is punched by a tank and knocked into a nearby room. Bill looks up and sees 3 tanks standing in front of him. Bill cocks his machine gun and lights up a cigarette, telling the tanks that he'll be with him in a minute. We then cut to the survivors on the bridge. Francis is about to jump down and save Bill, but he's stopped by Zoe, telling him that if he were to go down there, Bill's sacrifice would mean nothing. Zoe, in very Bill fashion, gives a speech to Lewis and Francis. We'll wait this out, keep an eye out for smokers, but otherwise we should be safe up here. We stay quiet, the horde will disperse. Then what? We get Lewis to the boat and we get the hell out of here. We look after our own. The final shot of the Sacrifice comic shows Lewis, Francis, and Zoe on the boat sailing towards a tropical island, which is exactly what Bill envisioned for them. That concludes the story of the Sacrifice. However, before we end the video, there are a few more points I want to go over. Something I noticed when I read the Sacrifice comic for the first time was the contrast in leadership between Lieutenant Moira and Bill. These two men are very different, but what they both have in common is that they are seen as leaders in their respective groups. Lieutenant Moira talks a lot about protecting his squad and how he isn't going to stand by and watch people die. However, when Fort Millhaven is overrun and Moira gets scratched and infected, he commands his squad to lift him up. Moira is not a carrier, which means he's infected, and by joining the rest of his squad, he's putting their safety at risk. Lieutenant Moira knows this all too well, but that does not stop him from begging. Lieutenant Moira saw himself as a fearless leader who was doing what's right to protect his men, but the moment shit hits the fan and Millhaven gets overrun, Lieutenant Moira is exposed for the person that he is, a spineless coward who is only concerned about saving himself. Now let's compare that to Bill, who, instead of begging to be lifted up, willingly jumps down in an attempt to rescue his friends. And even when Bill knows he's gonna die, he doesn't beg and he doesn't cry. Here's one more panel from the comic book that sums it up best. Zoe, Lewis, Francis, you're safe. All I ever wanted was for you to be safe. I'd sacrifice another 100 people to keep you safe. I'd sacrifice myself. Course, that doesn't mean I'll go down easy. My job's done. Let's see what you got, you big dumb sons of bitches. Bill's sacrifice remains one of the best and saddest moments in Left 4 Dead's history. Valve's ability to tell a cohesive story with little to no cutscenes is very impressive. I hope I was able to add a new perspective to Bill's death and to the story of the Sacrifice as a whole. If anybody's curious, I will leave a link to the Sacrifice comic in the description down below so you can read it for yourself. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.